Hello and welcome to another episode of Coach and Coffee. Today we are going to talk about GPS devices for training. So make sure you get your coffee, come back, sit down, relax, and let's talk about it. So on Facebook, I'm in like 35-ish Facebook groups from all around the world for OCR, and it's awesome because you get to hear about people's different experiences. It's also a great way to keep up to date on information regarding different races. So if you seem to always be behind on the information, what's happening, those are good groups to be in. Just type them into Facebook and you'll find a bunch of them. But what comes up a lot of times on there and in some of the trail running groups that I'm a part of is which GPS devices to have for training. And what this comes down to, again, as always, is what is your training goal? In a previous episode, I talked about training for an ultra. And so when I started training for an ultra, and actually when I moved to the area I'm in now, Shenandoah Valley kind of area, the watch that I had was just a Garmin. I have no idea what model it was. It was inexpensive when I got it. It worked well for what I was doing when I lived up in Falls Church and was training clients up in Arlington, Virginia. But when I got down here and started doing trail runs, I quickly found out that the battery was not sufficient. Its max lifespan was like 3 hours or just above 3 hours. It was a cheap watch, but it was a good watch for what it was. But it wasn't good enough to make it through some of the longer trail runs around here. And then especially when I started training for longer distance things, especially like specializing, my goal was to start specializing in beasts and then moving up to ultras from there. It wasn't a good enough battery. So I ended up looking around for GPS watches, and one that was, we'll say, highly recommended by some athletes that I respected and who did long distance and long duration events was Suunto. So I guess it was their newest model, or one of their newest models at the time was the Suunto 9. And the battery life on it, there's different settings as far as like the level of accuracy and the type of sensing that's being done for the different settings that use more battery life or less battery life. Anyway, there's different settings. On the highest, most accurate setting where you're using GPS and blah, blah, all the other stuff, the battery life lasts like 20 some hours. I've never done a 20 some hour event to test it fully, but that's what it says, and based on the amount of training I do with it, that's probably pretty accurate. On some of the lower settings it'll go up to like 30 some hours, maybe even 40. But anyway, I needed a watch with a long battery life. Even if I wasn't doing 20 plus hour events, I didn't want to have to charge my watch after every single run. And when I would go out and do a 6-hour training run, which I've done multiple times, or even a 4, I didn't want to have to immediately charge my watch. I wanted it to be ready to go the next day as well. And so I needed battery life that was sufficient for that. So I ended up getting it. I got it on an awesome discount. So instead of it being like a $500 watch, it was $250. And I was like, do I really want to spend $250 on a watch? But I have used it for hundreds of training sessions, both cycling, running, hiking, all that, swimming, and some like random stuff with rowers and everything. I've used it. I don't know the number of hours I used it. I guess I could look back at the data, but it's over 200 hours, probably over 300 hours worth of usage out of it. Not to mention I use it as a watch, the stopwatch on it when I'm training for my rest times and all that type of stuff. So it has been more than worth the price. The question people run into is, what watch should I get though? I went this route. There are other watch brands out there that will, with long battery lives, like Garmin makes several, and Coros is another brand. I believe, oh crap, what's it called? I'm blanking on it at the moment, but there's like Polar has watches out there that'll last a decent amount of time. So your options aren't slim, and there's other brands too. If you just go looking, you'll find them. Garmin seems to be the most popular in OCR. That's true, and I'm sure it's true in like trail running and things like that as well. The issue you need to look at, what is your goal? Like I mentioned, my goal was I needed something that lasted a long time based on my training, realistically. And that wasn't like, oh, I might end up doing a 5 or 6 hour event, so I'll get this because it'll definitely cover that. As I'm going to be doing those things and I need something that covers it. If your training only has you doing short distances, there is no reason that I can think of to spend, if you are lucky, getting a watch like this on sale and, you know, like $300 or whatever. There's no reason to spend that, in my opinion. If you can get something like a lower end, and by that I mean one that's just not built for long distance, for a much cheaper rate. Like I know Garmin has watches that are in the $150 range, and actually Suunto does as well, that have great battery life as far as like they'll last several hours of activity, and they're really accurate and durable and good, and so they'll do the job. If you're only doing short distance stuff, that might work. We actually did a survey last year about GPS watches, and we put out the data in an article, and that was really good. A lot of people found that beneficial. There was an oddly high number of people using Apple Watches for Spartan racing, which I don't know how durable they are. I've honestly never worn or used an Apple Watch. I don't really like Apple products personally. It's just a personal thing, whatever. But the battery life on them, from everything I've heard, is not great. They will not last very long tracking on GPS. And I've also heard things about the GPS being a little iffy if you're out somewhere, you know, in the middle of nowhere where a lot of races are. Whatever. But the battery life is not good for like maybe a Super or a Beast. For a Sprint it seemed to be fine, but there was a lot of people who were iffy about longer distance races, especially if you're not going through it extremely fast and it's going to take you a few hours to complete it, and maybe the Apple Watch isn't the best choice. But it really comes down to goals. So like the Garmin that I had when I was in the Arlington area, I gave to Luke, Trio Fitness coach, and he's been using it since because it works perfectly, and he's not doing super long distance stuff, so he gets to track his mileage and elevation gain and everything. And the watch, well, it didn't cost him anything, and it cost me, I don't know, I think it was like $80, $70 or $80, I don't remember. But it works for the job. What I would recommend, I'm all about not wasting money and using the money you save by not wasting money on things that are actually valuable. So don't waste money on like a $700 or $800 brand new model Garmin or Suunto or whatever. I think Coros makes watches a little bit cheaper, more inexpensive, I should say. I don't know about the durability than other companies, but don't waste money on something you don't need. If you don't need the Phoenix 6 Pro, or I have no idea what they are anymore, or the Suunto 9 barometer is the version that's I think it's like $500 or $600, I don't know, it's like a level up version of this that was more expensive. If you don't need that, don't buy it. Like, I know it's to a certain extent a status thing, and I know it's like cool even though it shouldn't be, to have like a fancy expensive watch at a race or just to wear it around, but like, who cares? I've when I wasn't wearing this watch, when I didn't have this, I never wore the Garmin at races because I didn't know that it would hold up. It may well have. It was water resistance, but it may not have. So I didn't wear it at races. And there are tons and tons of athletes who, in the age group and competitive waves, who were wearing super fancy, expensive watches to track their races, and I was beating them by light years. So like, a watch isn't gonna change how good an athlete you are. The data it provides may help you to train better and become a better athlete, but just because you're wearing a watch that's worth a few $100s does not make you a good athlete. So please keep that in mind. Don't waste your money on a watch. It is not a status symbol. It should be a practical tool to help you achieve a goal. If I never got into longer runs, I would never have bought this watch. I probably would have ended up buying like a lower level Garmin or a lower level Suunto with the battery life that was just like capped at 6 or 7 hours. If my long run time would be like 3 or 4 hours, and that would have been perfect. It would have been able to go the next day if I needed to do a training run the next day without charging it. But there would have been no reason to get a watch like this. I could have saved $100, $150 if I had gotten the discount on one of those, even more. So be smart with your money. Choose a watch based on your goals. If you have a goal of 2 years from now to run an ultra, and this year you were going to run a beast, I know races are gone right now, then maybe it would be worth it to get something with a longer battery life, knowing that you're building up to an ultra long term. But if that's not in your sight range, don't bother. Don't waste your money. I can't say it enough. It's not a status symbol. It doesn't make you cool. Having a fancy, expensive watch doesn't make you a good athlete. It doesn't matter. You are what you are based on what you've done, not what you're wearing. All right. I think that about covers it. As far as the accuracy of GPSs, I don't know that there's a massive variance at this point. I'm sure there are people who have taken them out in the middle of nowhere and tested them, comparing different brands and everything. But like, your phone has a GPS, your watch has a GPS. Every device you have now pretty much has a GPS built in. GPSs are pretty solid. Unless you're in the middle of nowhere and like there's a deficiency in a specific brand for that area or something, I don't know that you're gonna get a much better GPS with one brand than another. With a higher, more expensive watch, you may get one that's like higher quality and it'll pick up a signal faster or better. I've heard and seen people complain about, oh, it takes my watch 2 minutes to pick up a signal, and I'm like, okay, it's 2 minutes. Like, do some warm-ups. Who cares about 2 minutes? Mine generally picks one up within 10 to 20 seconds, but there have been times where I've had to just stand there for like 5 minutes. Very rare, but and just wait. Just do some warm-ups. Be patient. Whatever. The only other thing to consider with your GPS watch, if you're going to be wearing it during an OCR, is durability. So you're obviously not going to want to buy a super cheap one that is not water resistant or waterproof, or isn't like shock proof, or has fragile, I don't even want to call it glass anymore because it's not really glass, but a fragile screen, because if you hit it, it might break and then you have to buy a new watch and then you spend a lot of money. So just consider durability if you're going to be wearing it during a race. A lot of people don't need to wear one during a race because there's not a whole lot to gain from it unless you care about the distance, the elevation gain, and your heart rate. And the heart rate monitors on almost all the watches suck anyway. So really all you need to wear it for is the distance and elevation gain. And the only reason you need those is if you are going to be running that race again. It's cool to have the data after the fact, but if if you're going to run that race next year and you want to train better for it, it's helpful to know the distance and elevation gain of last year's. They change up the course, but they don't change it up insanely much. So it'd be good for those reasons, but otherwise, I mean, why are you wearing it during a race? You probably don't need to. Some people do it for like refueling purposes, to look at their watch and be like, oh, it's been 15 minutes. But for that, you can literally buy like a $15 watch from Walmart that is virtually unbreakable, like a Nokia phone. and set a timer and, fuel every 15 minutes or whatever. There's a lot of it depends going on in here, and there are so many people asking about this online. So I'm going to link the survey we did with the watch in the description below, and we'll actually be doing another survey at some point, probably this year, maybe next year, it just depends. So we'll update that data again, but yeah, just find a watch that meets your actual purposes. Don't go and buy a status symbol for no reason. All right, that's it. I will catch you next time on Coach and Coffee.